I'd like to bring to order the special meeting of council, March 18th. Disclosure of pecuniary interests and the general nature thereof. They can be identified now or anytime during the meeting. We'll move right into finance, and I'll turn it over to Brandy.
Okay, so this meeting is a little quicker than we originally planned. So I was a little disappointed because I thought I'd have more time to work on it, but had to get things out on the agenda. So then I worked on it over the weekend and was pleasantly surprised that I think if we actually make some budget guidelines and make some decisions today, that we could actually have a budget fairly quickly. We're in a lot better shape than I expected. A lot of the numbers still have to be vetted. I've only had really quick preliminary discussions with the department heads. So hopefully we can get some more information today, and it'd be really nice if we could make some decisions and get things moving. Couple of the questions you want to ask are, what's reasonable to actually get done this year? We tend to put a lot of projects in the budget and then not actually get them done. And then there are also limitations on there are things that have to get done that we're required to get done that we can't cut. So obviously those have to be the priority. The numbers that we have right now are preliminary. There's going to be a lot of changes once we vet the numbers a little closer. There's some grant dependent numbers, so those will change when and if we hear in time whether or not the grants are approved. The department heads will probably continuously get updated quotes or better numbers, or tenders will come in. So as that goes, we will update the numbers accordingly. Also, there's always some differences in what department heads consider materials and service versus capital versus what the generally accepted accounting principles are. So sometimes there's movement in between those lines. Oh, I'm logging out here again. Having trouble staying connected. I have to hotspot to my phone in order to get connected to the network, so it's not the most reliable system here.
Yes, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Brandy, are we gonna go kind of through this line by line and little explanations, or?
Yeah, so what I'm hoping for is to go through it line by line. That way, if you have any questions for the department heads or want more information for the next meeting or that sort of thing, we can do that. And with any luck, we can actually cut some items.
Yeah. And all the department heads are there. I can't even see their heads. There we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, while I'm trying to connect here, So what I did was basically the capital items that were requested from all the department heads. And again, some of these numbers need to be vetted better. So we have, for the most part, we have notes with the description. Then we have the number that was budgeted. And then some of these projects were actually from last year, just moved to this year. So in that case, we have the reserves coming out of last year, of the last year budget. And some are grant related, so there's grant revenue associated. And then the last column shows the taxes that would be required. So what I did was, I did this, and just again, they're all a lot of willy-nilly numbers, even the operating. I haven't delved through a lot of the numbers individually, but at this point, it's a 20% tax increase. But if we use our surplus deficit and reserves, we can, and make some cuts to what's reasonable, we can definitely get to a number that council is more comfortable with. I don't recommend using too many reserves, but I do recommend using the full surplus deficit. So let's just go through line by line, and doesn't look like I'm going to stay connected here, so hopefully I have everything up that we'll need.
Yes,
So-
Councilor Sean.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Brandy, how much do we have to cut from the budget? Let us know right now to get it down to what we would consider a decent number.
Well, it depends on, first of all, what everybody considers a decent number. And again, I don't recommend depleting reserves completely. And this is a very aggressive budget. So I do believe there needs to be some cuts, and there needs to be, you know, we need to know what's realistic to actually get done this year. And so I'd rather do it that way than give you a number.
Yes, Councilor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Just looking through the discussion, and I see the 2024 preliminary numbers. Is there any way that we can, for a future copy, have the 2023 or previous ones so we can compare what these line items might be in comparison to previous years?
The problem with capital is it's generally very different every year. Completely different projects, completely different. That's a little easier to do when it comes to operating, just because you're usually quite static, you know, with except for inflation, that sort of thing. But when it comes to capital, it's almost completely different every year.
Yeah, I just think it would help with contextualizing some of these numbers. Thanks.
So the first on the list is Town Hall for a boiler, 20,000. Now, we do have 20,000 in reserve for the Town Hall, but it wasn't actually for the boiler. But I did take it out in this instance because the original upgrades we had for it probably wouldn't have been 20,000. It was a lot of internal labor and that sort of thing. Fire capital expenditures. So this is a grant that is looking at getting extra equipment for training, and it is mostly grant dependent. So if we don't get the grant, we wouldn't be doing the project, although there is a part of the project, I think, that we would like to get done anyway. So that's subject to change. The fire vehicle, if you remember from last year, we, I believe, had either 100 or 150. So normally what we do is we put 50,000 into the budget to put into reserves, as with the intention of having ideally the full amount so that when we needed to purchase the fire truck, it would be, we'd have the money. So we're looking at, so we did at last year's budget, we did as well, but it got cut. Putting the deposit down this year because next year, it takes at least a year for the actual vehicle to be ready. So this is 100 grand over what the normal 50,000 into reserves budget is. I don't know what, Graham, do you have a more recent budget estimate for the actual fire truck?
Yeah, the new fire truck is approximately, depending on what is available at the time. What we're looking for right now is a tanker pumper, and they were around 600 during 2021, and then as soon as the availability materials went haywire across the world, we went up to about 850, but they're starting to come down again. So I'm looking at around 800,000 for a new fire truck.
Okay, that's higher than I thought.
Yes, Councillor Johnson.
So how much are we short of the 800,000?
We have 400 in reserves.
Yes, Councillor Sean.
Mayor Ferguson, so we need to come up with another $400,000 in the next 2 years.
That's correct.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brandy.
Okay, so demolition, this is 60,000. We have 40 in reserves. Engineering capital, that is to go into reserves, that is just for future use. Road crack sealing, that's already been approved, so you can't cut that. Bridge capital, this is probably going to require some input. So this is 750,000 to replace 2 bridges, which kind of came up. It wasn't originally in our long-term capital plan this early. So I don't know, Tyler, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so we got our bridge inspections back. 2 years ago, we had 3 to 5 years before having to look at rehabilitate these structures, which is usually actually kind of a conservative estimate. Unfortunately, the inspection came back from last year and said that they were both in need of replacement.
Which footbridges are those?
The one that goes into Legion Park, or Legion Point, and then the one behind the library that shoots over to Maple. So it is an interesting thought of levels of service and if we actually need both bridges or if council would look at moving down to one bridge. Obviously, it saves us 50% of the cost roughly, so.
Is this like total replacement?
Yes.
They can't be rehabilitated?
Basically, they need such extensive rehabilitation that you're at the point that the costs are going to wind up being almost the same. They can't rehabilitate anything in place, so they have to remove the bridge and to rehabilitate, so that's where most of your costs are coming in anyways.
Councillor Johnson.
What a ridiculous, I'm nothing against you, Tyler, at all, but what a ridiculous amount of money to replace 2 pedestrian bridges.
Yeah, bridges are expensive. So these are for modular bridges, right? So they just come and just drop one right down.
Yeah.
Worth noting, I mean, there's a fair bit of scrap steel between the old 2 bridges that would see some revenue come back, but yeah. I think these bridges were all put in initially through a grant with the AEDC, if I'm not mistaken.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, so Tyler, where'd you get quotes for these bridges from?
These are just some historical costs that our engineers had. They just finished replacing one. I think it was in Marathon. So they had a somewhat up-to-date quote on a replacement modular structure.
Okay, well, because I was involved when we were bidding on these bridges and installing them, and it seems to me they were $50,000 to $100,000. We did the one on Pine Crescent there too, and that seems like that seems like a whole lot of money. Maybe you should be going out for quotes.
Yeah, I mean, things have certainly got more expensive than 1996, I think, when they were installed. So um, it's just, that's the cost of the bridges. I mean, we can certainly
So-
get more quotes, but
One more quick. So is the structural steel, it's not just the wood that needs replacement, structural steel?
that's correct.
So they've done some non-destructive testing on those?
It's at the point you don't even need to.
Okay. What?
Councillor
One more.
Well, just a second, Councillor Martin, Councillor Shine?
My question is this, my point of view is, I say we go down to one bridge.
I agree.
I mean, if we're going to have to make cuts to something, remove the one bridge, and then how much do we have to get approval from the environment? Do we have to pay for all those kinds of things like we found out with the culvert?
Well, luckily the abutments are still in good enough shape, so it's literally just dropping a new bridge onto the existing foundations. So that's inherently an easier project. And even when we take the other bridge, we'll decide which bridge we're going to keep, I guess. But when you take the other bridge out, the abutments will still be there. So if in 5 years council decides they want to put that bridge back in, it's likely an option to just bunk it.
As the budget improves, hopefully. I would say my opinion is, keep the bridge that goes directly across from the library to Maple.
I agree with that as well.
Councillor Martin, you had one more thing?
Yeah, what are you attributing the bridge failures to, Tyler?
Well, there's no failure yet. The point is to fix them and replace them before they fail. But there's
So what is it salt on we're using salt on the bridges or something like that, or what's failing, the structural steel?
Yep, structural steel on the underside of the deck is failing.
Thank you.
Councillor Knowles?
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. If we did go down to one bridge for whatever reason, is there any issues with fire hazards or anything? Because that would basically become a one point of access at Leacham Point, right? The roadway would be the only way in and out if you took that other bridge out? Is there any other way across?
No, not to the best of my knowledge anyways.
Okay.
But I mean, if it's on fire, just hop in the river, then you're
There you go.
safe.
Thanks.
Two-part question, Tyler. First off, how quickly, are you at a point where you have to close them down, or are they still safe to use? Is there a timeline for when we would actually have to close them down or completely remove them? Second question, is there any other alternative than a modular sort of span bridge?
So the report says they're at the end of their serviceable life, so we really shouldn't be leaving them open for much longer than that. We've seen what happens when we do that. And in terms of other options, I mean, you have to span a river, like it's a bridge, or I'd hate to even think about trying to put a big culvert in there.
Councillor Shine?
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. I'm just going to say, we can't let what happened to the last issue on the Mercury culvert happen with the bridges, so we need to be firm on what we're deciding we're going to do today.
Or on this budget
On this budget.
today? Councillor Zacharias?
I was going to ask, do we need to decide exactly what we're doing with these bridges today, or do we just need to, so what would that do to your budget then of the 750,000? Cut it in half, or
It'd
this
be a little bit
removal?
less than half. The Maple Bridge is the longer of the two, so
Okay.
it would be 30 or 40% probably. Again, I can reach out and get some up-to-date quotes on what our actual bridges would need, but
Okay. Plus this removal of the other bridge, whatever one we, so I agree with removing the one straight from the library to the point, because I think that bank,
yeah, that's the museum to the point.
that's it, yeah, that one. The bank on that looks sketchy, but I agree with that.
Oh, Councilor Martin, sorry.
Sorry for so many questions. Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Before we decide on if we're gonna lose a bridge, can we get some realistic quotes locally? You know, Thunder Bay, Atikokan, whatever, and see what those actual numbers are gonna be?
Yeah, I mean, we do have realistic quotes based off of a replacement that just happened last year, but if you'd like us to reach out to, maybe a Thunder Bay contractor, supplier of modular bridges. I know we did have one reach out recently, so we can get them to give us not a firm quote, but an updated number here.
Troutman did build one of those bridges years ago, as well as B.R. Davidson as well.
Yes, Jason?
Another point to consider as well is, I mean, this isn't permanent, right? I mean, we can remove both bridges immediately, which sounds like we need to do. We most certainly should replace at least one of them right away. But there's no reason to say that we can't look for future funding. We can't, you know, we could leave those footings, I'm assuming, in place for the Legion Point one, and then maybe at a later time either budget or find some grants that might, you know, help us do that one, right? So it's not that we're saying today that bridge is gone, we're never, you know, never to replace it, but we're saying immediately the situation we're in, we'll have to make a decision very quickly on at least one of them, right?
Councilor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Which bridge, so should we be shutting down the one that goes across from the museum to where the log cabins and things are? Should we be shutting that down right away?
I think we'll be okay to do it at the same time of replacement, so don't wait too long.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Rondi.
Okay, next is patching capital, which is just random patching over. It's not related to the ISIP grant. Lighting capital, that's our normal annual $50,000 for LED upgrades. Dam material and service, so this is partially part of a project that was done was budgeted for the last year and moved to this year. And then I don't know if you have additional stuff in there, Tyler?
We're looking to get rolling on that one, actually right away here. We're just talking to the ministry right now to finalize the work plan.
Sorry, I thought that was funded from last year and we put the money into reserves.
Yes, except it wasn't, the tender came in a lot higher, so I think we budgeted 75 or 100 and it came in at 140, so we had to move the budget around, and yes, it didn't get completed, so we did put the money into reserves.
Yeah, that's disappointing because I thought we budgeted and it was gonna be done last year, and now I see we have a major shortfall on that.
Well, now I'm questioning if there is a shortfall because the tender was 140.
And we moved things around in the budget to cover it, so it just comes down to what actually got put into reserves at the end of the year versus.
No, but you budgeted 175, so can we cut 30 from that?
I believe the tender is 167.
Okay, I'll follow up on that. Okay, Public Works Building, 100,000. They've been doing upgrades the last few years. Public Works Equipment, 150, that's just the annual amount that we always put in. Airstrip capital, that's already approved. And if you recall, both of the the crack ceiling were taken out of last year's budget and moved. Gas pump material and service for IFR certification. Storm capital for the Pine Crescent. If you recall, we took the Pine Crescent work out of the Mercury culvert work because of the overages there. Culvert capital to finish completing Mercury, 1.5.
Excuse me, Randy, that's money that we have to put in 1.5 million for this year?
Yes,
So we weren't fully funded on that last year?
no, so, and the project's not complete, so basically you have to allocate what was done that year, and then any, you'll see at the bottom down here, I have holdbacks, because that's work that was completed last year, but we have to pay for it this year. So we put 320 into reserves last year. If you recall, I think at the time we had to put into reserves, we only had bills up until October, so it was kind of a guessing game as to what we'd have left. And we just recently received the final 2023 bill for that project, and I haven't even looked at it yet. So this number is subject to change, but I don't expect it to change very much.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Randy, how much over budget thus far are we on this culvert?
Again, I haven't looked at the December bill, and I'm missing a few change orders, but I would guess around 400,000.
So are we still going through change orders? That's
Yeah.
costing us more money?
Some credit, some more, just depends on the change order.
Councillor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Friskin. Is there a reason why we didn't qualify for emergency funding through the government for this?
Well, we had already budgeted to do the culvert, so it was already budgeted for, and as far as the emergency funding, I don't know how it works, but you don't generally get money for things you've already planned to do and budgeted.
Oh, okay, okay. You tried? Okay.
Yes, Graham.
Yeah, I can speak to the emergency funding, or somewhat. So in this particular case, as Brandy just said, the budget was already approved to replace the culvert. So when it fell in the river, the assessment was, well, you already budgeted for it, so you already had the money. So we can't say, we can't claim we don't have the money because we already budgeted for it. And then the second part, which was a bigger part of this, is there were other routes. Had it been more effective of the town if there was only one route from one side of the river to the other, then of course they would have stepped up their game. But in this particular case, they said there are other routes through community for both emergency evacuation. Multiple routes, in actual fact, was their response, and therefore this did not fall under an emergency funding criteria.
One other final addition too is a lot of that funding is geared towards natural disasters as well. So if the collapse was due to high water level flooding, but it was at its end of its useful life, right? And we had reports. So if it would have been that, I think we would have been able to tap into some funding, but due to the circumstances, we weren't eligible for it.
Okay, next we have the garbage truck, which was already approved and already funded, so, but because we're paying for it this year, it has to go in this year's budget. Cemetery capital, that is for the columbarium, and 10,000 to put into reserves for the next columbarium. Pioneer Center capital, that is,
Excuse me, Brandy, it's $50,000, but do we have money in reserves for that columbarium?
We do have money in reserves.
I was, and maybe I'm wrong, but my numbers were $50,000 for a columbarium, and we had $43,000 in reserves. Is that not?
I think the columbarium is actually going to be 40. And then I think we have 46 in reserves. So we can use the reserve money if we,
Yeah, that's what it's for, right?
yes.
Like, we wouldn't leave that money in there and then raise taxes to cover the columbarium, and we've been putting money away for the columbarium
Yes.
in the past.
Yes, either way. Some of the money was also for groundwork and that sort of thing.
So this 50,000 is kind of a red herring because we put the money away already.
Well, we have, yeah, so we would have enough for the columbarium to take from, but then there's an additional 10 to put into reserves for the next columbarium. But we can take the money from reserves.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So what happens when people purchase columbarium space and the funds go back in? Does that go into a line item or help pay for the next one? How's that work exactly?
It goes into revenue. So you'll see in the operational budget every year, there's revenue for plot sales and columbarium sales.
Councillor Zacharias.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. I might ask Sue. I thought there was only space for one more columbarium, which is this one that we're buying. Or am I wrong?
There's only room where we want to put it for one more.
Okay.
So,
But there's space for more columbariums.
yes,
Sure.
we got to look
Okay.
into, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Pioneer Center Capital, windows, doors, and furnaces, that's a grant-dependent capital purchase.
So the grant-dependent part of that is the 10-5.
The grant-dependent part is if we don't get the grant, we don't do the project. So that will completely go away if we get rejected. But if we do get the grant, then our portion would be the 10-5, I believe, yeah. Little Falls Building, so these are outstanding from last year, and we have money in reserves and grant money for that. So that's for the roof and the hood. Golf equipment capital, that is for a fairway mower, and we have that in reserves. Ski capital, Tom? I don't remember talking about that one.
That amount is reserves for in the event that we lose a motor at the ski hill.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Rec transportation capital, so this is part of our grant, but also we have to put money into it as well. But I did notice on the weekend that I forgot to put the grant portion in here. So this actually has no taxpayer increase attached to it. There's 34,000 that should be in the grant line. Rec Wellness Capital, the Canopy and Rail, and this is a prior year project, so we have the money in reserves. Arena capital, same thing for railing and prior year. Pool building, so this is for pool deck, filter, and pump. And there's an associated grant with it. So ideally, we will get the grant. If not, those numbers may change. I believe the pool deck is required to be done, and we do have some money in reserves for that. But the rest of the project would probably go away.
Councillor Zacharias.
Sorry, going back to Ski Hill, do we have a specific ski reserves, or is that just general recreation?
We don't have any money in reserves right now for ski. So we do have,
Okay.
in our recreation reserve, it consists of all the except for Rec Wellness has its own reserve. But so if you notice on the reserve, I'm hoping it was clear, but on the reserve draft I gave you guys, so the numbers that are in the middle make up the amount that is right underneath it. So for example, where it says culvert 320 and industrial mall, all of those numbers add up to the reserve working capital of the 643,680. So, and that's the same with recreation. It's broken down there.
Okay, I just wasn't seeing ski, but there's nothing in there right now, so that's
No,
why.
no.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, library capital was for miscellaneous stuff. If you recall, the children's department just got upgraded. So it was for anything kind of left over that had to be done this year for that project, and with the remainder going to reserves for shelving. Museum building, 5,000 for storage for a shed. The museum also has money in reserves that we could use. Charleston, this is another leftover project for electrical upgrades for the motocross and stall covers. Industrial Mall, if you recall, last year we moved the electrical money for the industrial mall to change it to the doors. So this is now to complete the electrical. And there's money in reserves for that. Water treatment plant capital is, they kind of have a wish list every year of what work they want done at the sewage treatment plant and the water treatment plant.
Yes, Councillor McQuay.
Do you happen to know what the wish list is?
No, but Tyler does.
Thanks.
Things like VFDs for the pumps, some repairs to some of our filter, our turbidity meters, a couple of replacements to valves, things like that.
And next is the big one. So this was a shocker to me because I thought this project was going to go over this year and next year. So I panicked when I first saw it. So this is to do the complete ISEP Green project this year, and plus some storm work on O'Brien.
Brandy, when you say the whole ISIP, that's just the water main? Maybe I didn't hear you. Or that's the whole...
The whole ISEP grant project, and then plus, while we're in there, Tyler wants to get some storm work done while it's... So now this number is subject to change with the tender, and also me, Tyler, and the engineers all have different numbers, so we have to, you know, delve into it a little further, but that's the basic gist of it. And we had 200 put into reserves last year for it, and that would be the full amount of the grant if we completed the project, the 3.2. Sewage treatment capital, so that again is part of the wish list.
Sorry, Brandy. Councilor Knowles?
Sorry about that. Thank you. Just with the water main, so that would take that project from digging up to completed and paved end to end on O'Brien. That would be the end of it, or is there any additional components to it?
The paving is a separate grant. That
Okay, but that would be everything up to the pavement then, on end to end. Okay. Thank you.
sewer capital is for sewer work in the ISIP areas. Sewage pump station capital, I don't remember that one, Tyler. Was that for something specific?
Same thing, like we need a new trash pump. We're looking at a couple valves that need a little bit of repair, things like that.
So then at the bottom are just chicken scratch notes. So outstanding holdbacks, again, those have to be paid this year, even though the work was completed last year, so we have to raise the money this year. Then I have grant money. So we haven't applied the specific grants to specific projects. One, we need council to decide what projects we are or aren't doing, and then we have to delve into the requirements of the grants, because some of them you are only allowed so much provincial funds, federal funds, that sort of thing, or you're only required to do certain types of work, that sort of thing. So just in order to get my budget numbers and that sort of thing, I just left them loose so that we can, once we make all the decisions, we can apply them accordingly. Federal gas tax, the minimum amount we have to spend this year is $370. It has a 5-year banking limit, so basically every 5 years you have to spend anything you had 5 years ago. So we have to spend that $370 this year, or we'll lose some of it. We also have additional federal gas tax funds available. OCIF is just a guess. We have no idea how much we're getting this year, so that's just a pure guess.
Historically, the last few years, though, it's been around $500,000, though, hasn't it?
They have changed their funding. So last year, I think it was 500,000. Prior to that, it was around 200. But they've changed their funding model. So I expect less. But that's why I put it back to the 200. I don't know.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So Brandy, that $370,000, nothing, it's not been earmarked for anything yet?
Yes and no. So we've earmarked it for this budget because we need the money and we have to spend it, but we haven't allocated it to a specific project yet.
Councilor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So what projects can we use it for?
Bridges, roads, again, we just have to be careful because, for example, the water main project already has federal funds and provincial funds, so we can't necessarily use it for that. So basically, what I do is I wait till we figure out what projects we're doing, and then I look into where it's most effective and efficient to use the money.
So because we have that grant for the paving for O'Brien, then that money can't go towards to do the infrastructure underneath?
It could if it's not with the ISIP Green 2 project. So it could go towards work that isn't funded.
And what kind of work so far isn't funded yet, Tyler?
It'll be the repairs to the storm sewer.
And you were gonna replace, I'm sorry. I'm looking for specifics.
Question is,
I want the specifics. What are you doing underneath is there anything you're doing underneath that's not covered by any grants right now?
yes, the storm sewer work.
And we need to get that, that's what you wanted to get done, am I not mistaken, before we pave?
Yeah, we got the grant for the water main, and then
Right.
while we're in there, we're gonna replace some of the storm sewer. We should do more, but it's expensive to do, and it's kind of just the best that we can get away with.
Could we put this money towards the bridge as well?
As far as I know.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not sure if maybe because it's a pedestrian bridge, we wouldn't be able to.
I think it would be fine, but we'd have to look into that.
Sure, we wouldn't have any problem finding somewhere that fits.
Yeah, that's generally not an issue. Okay, now, as far as operations go, we generally, there's generally not a lot of changes. I mean, obviously, there's inflationary changes, but we got the impression from council that you guys weren't looking for any changes in service levels. So what I did was just kind of quickly went through operations to see anything over and above the norm. And I'll just quickly go through some of them. So the strategic plan, $15,000. Pay equity, $20,000. The food cycler program, $12,000. The asset management plan update, which is already approved, $35,000. The museum transition, so Lois is retiring this year, and so she was looking at hiring a new curator and potentially having them for 3 months while Lois is still there to help with the transition. She is looking for funding for that, so that is a possibility. Our contracts are up for renewal again this year. So that will potentially raise legal costs a little more, salaries a little more. We're hoping to have full staff again this year, so that's what we'll be budgeting for. There's a lot of work that needs to be done IT related, and I don't have anything in the budget right now because I just don't know how realistic it is to get anything done this year. So we need new phones, a new server, backup support plan. So where that will end up, I don't know yet. This isn't a big item, but it's just out of the norm, so I threw it in here. Animal control needs a new hot water tank and some traps. It's only like $2,000. Pedestrian bridge repair, we have $15,000, and that I'm assuming is subject to change if we decide on a replacement or.
Those are some repairs to the other.
Oh, okay. Grizzly screener, $15,000. Storm CCTV, $50,000, and I believe that is part of the OCIF grant. Truck rental for $20,000 for the garbage truck, and our fine for $60,000. Other than that, I didn't notice anything glaring from operations. It all looked pretty static. Again, I didn't have a lot of time to delve into it, but operationally everything looked pretty normal. So do we want to make any decisions tonight, or do we want to come back with more information? Do you want to ask more questions to the department heads?
Obviously, a 20% increase isn't doable, so major decisions have to be made. So I don't see any, you know, how do we account for any revenue that we get?
Well,
Is that operational, or
well, the grant revenue for capital is,
No, not necessarily grant revenue. Like, we were talking about tipping fees were a lot more than they have been. Any money coming in from the golf course, the arena, all these things, where does that fit in?
that's all in operations. And again, they're usually pretty static numbers. The waste management was higher last year, and so Tyler budgeted higher this year. I'm a little leery with that one just because we had a couple of big contracts, and that happens. If you have a lot of construction going on or something, your tipping fees go up significantly. But he also expects a lot of projects this year, so but other than that, your normal revenues, operational revenues, don't change a lot year to year. They can, for example, the ski club, if there's no snow, they're not going to get revenues. But again, for the $1,000, it doesn't make a big impact. So it's the capital that makes a big impact.
Right.
And for the capital, I have the grants associated on there.
So I think, as Brandy had stated earlier as well, though, with the utilizing the full surplus deficit from the 2020 budget year will help significantly. And like she said, with the use of some of the reserves, we're going to get that number way down. I think the main thing that I think administration is looking for today is, for example, the discussion regarding the footbridges, right? Is it imperative that we replace both those bridges this year? Shut them down, replace one. I think knowing that tonight will help us move forward. That's pretty significant. To your point regarding the columbarium, are we going to fund that through reserves, or do we want to fund that through this year's levy? I think that's an important one to move forward to as well. If there's any questions or concerns regarding capital equipment, repairs to buildings, that sort of things, we're here to answer any questions regarding of any of that. And I think if Brandy has that, and then of course the O'Brien work and the storm work, if we have that answered, I think Brandy will have hopefully enough information to be able to work her magic and come back with a reasonable tax rate increase that we can work on from.
Councilor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So I'm just trying to wrap my mind around all this. So we think all of these things can be done this year? Yes? Hopefully?
You would have to ask the department heads that.
Okay.
I have concerns.
Okay. I hate the idea of us cutting something that's not achievable at the expense of something that may have been achievable, and just prioritizing where everything is. And some of this just how important it is to get done this year, and there's no wiggle room to defer it to a future year or change any of that. So just making sure that everything's in priority so we can make those decisions with that kind of full breadth of knowledge. That's it.
Councilor McQuay.
Thanks, Mayor Ferguson. This one's for you, Tyler. For the water treatment and the sewer treatment capital expenditures, you have 200 for each, and you said a few different things. Would you be able to give us a breakdown of the cost of each thing so that we can sort of have a better idea of if there is cuts to be made, that we can look at that?
Yeah, I can check your smart sheet out. Typically, these aren't things that we want to be cutting when you're talking about water and sewage treatment in the plant. These are all fairly important projects.
Yeah, I understand that. I just want to know what they are and the breakdown.
Johnson?
A question for Tyler. The 100,000 for Public Works building, is that a Public Works yard,
Yeah,
Tyler?
that's down at the shop. We're finishing up the project we started last year, remember, when we got the doors approved? So we're just trying to finish up that project and do a couple other repairs at the shop.
And did the hoist get repaired?
Yes, it did. We fixed that one in-house. It saved us like $300,000 probably by the time all was said and done.
Good on you.
Councilor Zacharias, did you have something?
Yes and no. Like, how are you guys able to, department head, tell us how much of this is from last year? Like, what didn't get done last year? Or is it just the Mud Lake Dam?
A lot of that you can tell by what money's coming out of reserves, because that generally means
shuffled?
we put it in reserves last year because it wasn't complete and then are taking it out.
Okay.
Councilor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So we know we need to do one bridge, close one bridge, correct? We can't afford to lose the grant money for the O'Brien work that needs to get done. So my question is this, can we find out where best these extra money that Brandy talked about from the OCIF and the federal gas tax can be used where we're not jeopardizing any other grants?
We won't be. We'll find, there's no risk of us not being able to find where to allocate that money.
So then it should
that
be
won't
going
be a problem.
towards our O'Brien Street, because we don't want to lose the paving grant, right? That's my interpretation of it. Am I wrong?
No, that's correct. And the paving for O'Brien is in tender right now, right? So
Right.
the paving is a part of the project that's tendered out right now. It's just not shown in this budget because it won't be done till next year.
Right.
The paving.
So we need to get all that underneath infrastructure done so we can pave next year.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think the department heads have learned over the past couple of years when we're coming to these budget meetings, what exactly that we're bringing to the table. So to Councillor Zacharias' point, what you're seeing here are things that really we ought to be getting completed now. So they're on there for a reason. They're high priority. There's not a lot of wiggle room. I know for my purposes, we've left some stuff off of there because they would be deemed luxury items in this process. So that's to answer your point. All of these, I think all of us feel comfortable that they need to be done this year.
As a follow-up as well to the O'Brien project, this was no surprise, right? We knew we had gotten a grant to resurface it. We were not comfortable spending all that money on resurfacing roads when the infrastructure underneath needed to be replaced. We don't have the money to do a full rebuild, we know that. So Tyler has tried to look at the stuff that absolutely needs to be done. We knew that that was going to have to come from the public coffers to get that done. And it's the right move in the sense that, you know, hopefully we won't have to be digging this up, right? So we have a brand new water line. We're going to do as much storm work as we can afford to do, and then have that paving done as well. So we knew this was coming, right? This was the budget where, when we talked about the O'Brien project, that we knew was going to be a challenge because part of that just wasn't going to be funded. Thank you.
Yeah, it was just kind of a follow-up to Tom's point about, you know, how much everything gets done in a year. It's also very dependent on when we know which projects are approved, right? So Mud Lake is a great example. We didn't know that the project was approved until late July, I believe. So by the time you finalize your design, you do a, 1-month tender call, and then you have usually, anywhere from 6 to 9 weeks for shop drawings and fabrication of these materials. You're at like the end of the year already.
Mud Lake has been in the budget for 5 years, over 5 years probably.
Until the ministry got involved.
Do I see in the budget, environmental, there's a lot of money in environmental.
In reserves, yeah, so that is for the landfill liability.
Oh, that's landfill
Post-closure,
liability, okay.
post-closure
Thank
costs.
you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Councilor Martin.
Thank you. Just getting back to the 2 footbridges, I'd like to defer a decision on closing both them until you get 3 realistic quotes to replace either both bridges or one bridge. I think you should go for 3 quotes. That seems like a huge number. And to make a decision closing them, you know, if the number comes in way less than that, that's, that's my, uh, opinion. Thank you, Mayor Ferguson.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Yes, Councilor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. So if we're gonna wait for these quotes to come in, Tyler, does that mean we have to close those bridges off now for the safety of the public?
I'll consult with our engineers on that one to see if we can stretch it out a bit till we get the quotes.
Okay, thank you.
And just so that we're clear, or for my sake anyways, we're good with a 3-quote procurement on this versus a full tender process.
Say that again?
We're good with like a 3-quote procurement instead of a full tender call. That was just the instruction we were just given. So just looking to confirm that, because that's not how we would typically procure something of this dollar value.
What's the procurement policy state on something like that?
That we would be going to tender.
Then we should follow the procedure. I think we should follow the.
If you go to tender, you're physically doing the job, so I think if we're just looking for quotes, I don't think we necessarily, we're not procuring it, we're just trying to get a budget number.
So, but we wouldn't necessarily go with the quotes then?
Yeah, if we're just looking for a budget number to make a decision whether we're gonna do the project or not, quotes are fine.
Okay.
But when you actually
Yeah. When we award it, it should be tendered.
should be tendered, or council approval not to tender it and to go with a quote instead.
Good with that?
I guess, I mean, it's probably gonna make a few contractors pretty angry when we're just kind of getting several nuisance quotes, but.
Number there, yeah. Yes, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Tyler, do you still have all the fabrication drawings, for those 2 footbridges? We wouldn't probably have to reproduce those, would we?
No, we've got those on file.
So we could just forward them out and say, give us a budget number to fabricate and install.
Yeah, or supply modular of a similar size for sure. We'll get some quotes on both options.
Yeah, that's how those were installed, was a modular style.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Thank you.
I don't want to, thanks, Counselor. I don't want to beat this to death, but do we need the exact same thing? What I'm saying is, do we need a $300,000 bridge when a $200,000 bridge will do? That's all do we want to say we want the same thing, cost be damned, we're getting the same thing, or do we want something similar at a different price? Someone might come in and say, you want that, it's $350,000, but I could give you something different for $250,000.
Yeah, a lot of these are pretty standard. I mean, it's engineered, right? You can't really decrease quality. The only option would be pretty much to make it narrower.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we don't want to decrease quality, and other than I would hope that they last more than 30 years if they're made of steel. But yeah, I'm just throwing, do we need apples to apples, or do we need something, do we need a bridge? Yes, Councilor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Is adding this extra step of process on going to delay this project enough that it may cause it to not be completed this year for whatever reason? Or does it just make more sense to go out to the tender process knowing full well that we're going to need to put a bridge in regardless, and just get it done?
Yeah, the only problem is you can't really tender out 2 bridges and then only give one without running into some issues with that. CCDC rules, or any change over 10 or 15%, they can basically re-quote the entire job. So
Okay, so we would have to decide then if we were going to just do the one before it went out to tender? That
would be ideal, yeah. Okay. You could probably put some language in the tender about a provisional second bridge so that they know it's not guaranteed, but
okay. That's my biggest concern, is that it's just going to add additional delays on, and we're going to end up missing the boat on getting the proper tenders and getting this completed with a very limited building season.
Yeah, we'll see how quick they can turn around some quotes, and then I mean we can just get the tender process approved outside of the budget discussions once we know that we're moving forward with it, like we did with crack sealing.
All right, okay, thank you.
It's also important, and Tyler can speak to the remainder of the bridge inspection reports, but we are going to have to look at funding options for the Mackenzie Bridge, right? And that's obviously more important than a pedestrian bridge, but it's going to cost a lot more money, and some work's going to need to be done there, if not a full replacement.
It is a
Full
Mackenzie's a full replacement, abutments included. And unfortunately, that one is actually significantly more important than a pedestrian bridge, in my opinion.
Councilor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Do we have any money put into reserves for that bridge?
I think we have 145 in bridge reserves.
Yeah.
And how much are you estimating the cost of that? Not going to be like Mercury, right?
Oh no, it's going to be more for sure. It's a bridge. It's probably going to be $4+ million.
Wow.
Bridges are very expensive.
Is there any grants out there?
Well, that's something you have to look for, some funding or
That's
venture or something. We can't fund that out of.
Yeah, that's what we've been looking for the
Annual
last few
tax
years.
dollars, yeah.
Big bridge repairs like that, they don't really send out a whole lot of grants for.
Federal gas tax does fund bridges, but if we use it all this year, we won't be able to access it.
But on the bright side, we are paying down debt that the town does have. So we may be able to do something. Like, it needs to be done. We can't do it in a budget. It has to be a project that's funded correctly.
Yes.
That number seemed to quiet everybody down. Any other questions for Brandy? That's the way it is. That's what it is. Oh, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Getting back to the bridges again. Possibly the curator at the museum could, maybe she has access to funding, being that bridge is kind of important to the museum point and part of the museum and part of the path of the paddle and all that sort of stuff. Maybe we should be asking her if she has any ideas to help us out. Thank you very much.
Yep, that's a good point, Councilor Martin. Kind of goes hand in hand with, other than that bridge other than the museum, that's in Canada Day, we don't have a lot of other uses for that bridge. Okay. Randy, any last instructions for us or requests or considerations?
No, I was just hoping to get some direction so that we could move forward. This is an extremely aggressive capital budget. Like, it's double than what we generally do. So.
Well, other than the O'Brien water lines, those big numbers, and the paving, there's nothing that I see to the department heads' credit that they're really asking for something that it'd be very tough to cut anything out of this budget. The way I see it. We have to make it a respectable budget, but things that were cut are back on here, and it seems like the easy ones to cut are the ones that get cut, but things never get done if we just keep cutting those same street lights, fire truck money, that kind of stuff. Like, we can't just keep kicking that can down the road every year. That's my opinion anyway.
We just also can't deplete reserves to the point where it's,
Well, we shouldn't.
but we're gonna, you have one or the other. You can't do both,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Zacharias.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Is there nothing in Public Works equipment reserves right now?
Well, that number though, we generally don't cut. That's an annual number just to keep, the,
I just don't see it on your reserve draft.
there was money in there because we had to take, we put money into the
We used it for the garbage.
garbage truck. I think there's 30 something left. Let me see here. $12,000 left.
Okay.
Jason?
And I'll get Tyler to answer this question, but Tyler, what's the cost to replace, let's say, the street sweeper or the sewage truck? One piece of equipment. What's the cost on that?
So last time we got a quote on a sweeper was $365,000, and that is 2020, I think we got that number, so I assume probably closer to 400 now. And that's a slightly smaller model than what we have.
And unfortunately, our fleet is aging, right? So, yeah.
So we generally put a minimum 150 in every year, only because of asset management wise, you want to keep, you know, so that 150 could be used for lease payments, could be used for whatever, but to keep that as a consistent contribution to asset management annually.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Tyler, did we lose a tandem?
Nope, we just had to go for some repairs.
Some major repairs?
Yes and no. Not as much as we thought it needed, but we ran into some issues with that one that we're still looking into.
What will repairs come in at? Any idea?
We're thinking like a couple thousand, nothing egregious in terms of in the M&S budget, so.
Councillor Shine.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Brandy, how much money are you comfortable with us taking out of reserves?
As little as possible. Because we're already taking a whole bunch out, right? So, I mean, ideally, I'd want to be putting money into reserves, but not with this budget. It's not going to happen. So.
Then my other question is for Tyler. You just want to replace 2 trucks this year, isn't that right?
That's correct.
So when you're looking at that, we're going to have to replace sweepers and things like that. Are there any grants out there? Because a sweeper you would only have to use seasonally, correct? Are there grants out there to replace those with electrical, since you wouldn't have to use them in the winter?
I've never even heard of an electric sweeper yet, but we are looking at a potential program where you get a sweeper for the summer, and then they come and take it and drop off a new sidewalk machine for the winter, and you just kind of flip through those. So we're looking into that, but it's expensive to do that as well.
Okay.
But at least you get 2 new pieces of equipment.
Thank you.
To Brandy's comment regarding building up reserves, right? And that's the prudent thing to do, is to build up your reserves. Obviously, this year we can't, and we have to use our 2020 surplus with the intent to hopefully have 1 to 2 years done. When we look at next year's budget, you know, hopefully we'll be in a situation where we can, you know, look at that tax stabilization reserve fund sort of thing, and if there's any future surpluses that are realized, that we can put towards that.
But next year, we're going to have the other bridge. I mean, it's not
There's always going to be those big projects and those expenses, right? So, yeah, and you have to also budget for reserves, so that's the challenge.
So,
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, some of this money though, when we're talking about taking money out of reserves, it was put into reserves because we didn't spend it last year.
yes, this money here, but in order to get to a reasonable amount, we're gonna have to take a lot more out of reserves. So this money that's on this sheet is basically the year-over-year projects that weren't done. But in order to get to a decent tax rate, we're gonna have to take a lot more out of reserves.
So right now, what I see is, correct me if I'm wrong, the reserves total is 6,377,000?
Yes, before this money is taken.
Right.
And some of that is,
Would you know what we had in reserves this time last year?
probably maybe 5.2, not sure. My fear is just using all of our reserves and then next year having
Definitely, that's
another
not the
giant
right
budget.
business, yes.
So ideally, I'd like to see some cuts made.
Anything else from me? Councilor Sean?
Thank you. Mayor Ferguson. Brandy, can you come back with us allocating these funds that you have put there, what you feel comfortable taking out of reserves and applying it to the projects that we shouldn't be getting rid of? And tell us what our tax would be? Or is that just something you can't do?
What do you mean the projects we shouldn't be getting rid of? It doesn't sound like council wants to get rid of any of them.
That's what I mean, like where you should allocate, how much are you comfortable taking out and coming back with where the money's gonna be going for the projects? Like putting, in towards the O'Brien, the bridge, the one bridge, if need be.
So I can take this and take, again, depending on what council's looking at for a tax increase, and take whatever we need to out of reserves. It doesn't mean I'm going to be comfortable with it. But what does council want, I guess is my question. I can do that.
I can't make that without it.
I don't understand, Brandy, like, what we're comfortable with. I need numbers to work with to say what we can take out of reserves to get to our 3% or 4%. What numbers are we looking at to get there? From the,
Well,
what you said, 20% you were looking at when we first started?
Yeah.
So what is the amount of money that we need?
Yeah, so if you want to keep all these projects, I can do that. I can figure out, I just expected some projects to be cut. So if we're not cutting anything, I can get that number.
Okay.
And we can, I mean, does council have a zone where they're comfortable for a tax increase this year?
My number's gonna be lower than some other people's number.
I'm 3 to 4%. I mean, the cost of everything is going up so much. If we keep staying at 2%, we're falling behind. Yeah. And I don't want to pay more taxes than anybody else. But the reality of it is, it has to be increased to keep up with the times.
Yes, Councilor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. And maybe I'm just alone in this thinking, but I'm actually comfortable going higher than that in lieu of the fact that there are many other municipalities looking at double-digit tax increases. It gets back to your point, nobody's happy with it, but the fact of the matter is we have a small tax base, we have a number of services that need to be provided, and the alternative is either taxes go up or people don't get their garbage picked up, or we don't have a pool, or we don't have, what is that service level that we're willing to cut? And in turn risk losing the people that we have in this community and losing the opportunity to get new people into this community to build that tax base so that in years future we have created those investments where we can have a lower tax base for everyone here. So I guess that's really what it gets down to. It's going to hurt this year. The question is, are we doing it for future generations or to keep things status quo now? And that's really where I would settle on it.
So, and I think, again, if we look at some of these, like Brandy had said, if council's not willing to cut back on some, I think by making the decision to say potentially replace one bridge, not two this year, going from $750,000 to maybe 300, possibly 350. I mean, there's a significant savings there. If we're looking at taking the Columbarium money from reserves, another 50,000, potentially $450,000 there. If you guys are content with the deposit on the fire truck, the capital equipment for public works, then I mean we'll basically we'll go back. Brandy will look at her numbers. She'll pull her reserves, and we'll come back to you guys and see where we sit there. And then if you have to further sharpen your pencils, then so be it. If that's is that fair?
You can take out, we've identified some big ticket items, and we've said that we would be open to taking money out of reserves, some money out of reserves. I think if we combine those two, come back with a number, and then if we need to make some decisions from there to get to wherever we want to land, then that's where we go, I think. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Again, Brandy, I apologize for not understanding, but the $370,000 gas money, is that free money at this time?
What do you mean by free? So it is a grant that we can spend on certain things.
So, is that in reserves or?
Yes.
Oh, it's in reserves already? So
Yeah.
that $370,000 would be added to the amount that you want to take out. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it would,
Need to take out.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But we have to spend that this year anyways, eh?
370 we have to spend, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we're already taking some out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I know it's not a whole lot of money, but you alluded to before where we are making better returns on our money that's in the
Yes, we're
bank.
getting high interest right now because we have a lot of money in our account because we haven't been doing a lot. But I expect that will change this year because of the work that's to be done.
Councilor Zacharias?
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Tom, the rec transportation capital, the garage, what's that? Is that for the handyman? What is that one?
The two handivans that we have are a valuable asset, and we like to keep them on the road as much as possible. We have a certain grant in place, but there's a timeline that it comes to an end, and we have money inside of that grant to do some things to preserve the life of the handivans, and one would be to keep them out of seasonal. Like we would put them in a garage of some sort. Graham and I are working on solutions, affordable solutions where we can make that happen. We're fortunate that inside the transportation grant that we have, we're allowed to do something like that. Brandy did the work on that to make sure that the grant would cover the building of that. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, so that's like a building of a whole separate garage.
Yes.
Plan to do this year?
We would like to, yes. There's a timeline on the grant. Like all the grants, there's a timeline.
Do that, we'll lose that. Is that correct?
If we didn't spend the money, correct, Mayor Ferguson, we would lose that money, I believe, eh, Brandy?
Yeah, so this is a weird grant where it's over several years. So this garage has already been deferred because it was supposed to be done before. So I think we have one more year on the grant. So, and then the grant is completely done unless there's changes, but that's another thing council's gonna have to decide is whether or not we're going to continue to fund the extra services that we do right now because of this grant, because next year it'll be over.
Councilor McQuay?
Thanks. Councilor Zacharias, I'm not sure if you heard Brandy earlier, that 34,000 shouldn't be in the tax bracket. It should actually be in the grant column. Gotcha.
Councilor Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Is there a column here for any surpluses? Like, we sold property this year to Resolute. I don't think you probably spent much on snow removal this year by the sounds of it. Is that a column anywhere here that I'm missing or?
No,
Randy?
those are in operations, so I can bring that to the next meeting once we finalize the numbers better. But operations generally don't fluctuate that much. And when it comes to labor, if you're not spending it on snow, you're spending it on sidewalks or somewhere else, so that generally doesn't make any savings.
If it doesn't snow. Okay, well, anyway, thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Brandy, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused here. I'm looking at the big ticket items here. The ICIP green, what does that stand for? And that's the 5,500,000. I hate to go back to that one.
Right. Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program.
Gotcha. So just to bring me up to speed, I might have missed this. So is that the O'Brien Street underground portion?
Yes.
Okay, and are we gonna do that this year?
It's out for tender right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone.
Anybody else? Randy?
When does that tender close, Tyler?
You have enough information from council?
I guess so.
Okay, so I think we'll come back on taking some money out of reserves to bring it to, give us some options on a tax levy or a tax increase. And Tyler's gonna come back with some numbers on the bridges.
Yeah, and at that point, we should have the tender completed and know the final cost for O'Brien too, so. Fingers crossed it comes in lower, but don't be surprised if it's higher.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. I was just along those lines. What's kind of our roadmap to move this forward so we can start to put forward a final budget so that the department heads can go and implement this while the seasons to do so are in effect. So I guess that's kind of what are these next steps, and when can we expect those timelines to come to fruition for everybody?
What's reasonable?
Well, it depends on when the numbers come in. So, I mean, I can give you numbers right away for this, but this isn't, you know, if we're looking at different numbers for the bridge and if the tender comes in, that'll change that.
So what's reasonable to meet again on this? Friday? I was gonna say a couple of weeks, but is that?
It depends on when I mean, I can give you information based on this, regardless of whether the other stuff comes in, but I'm assuming you would prefer to have the other information.
Well, if we look at, this is my feeling, if we look at an hour and a half of our time, if we come back and spend another hour and a half of our time and get as much information, maybe it won't be complete, but we'll be farther down the path instead of.
But I think this is the hard part, right? Deciding what to cut and what not to cut. The rest is easy, so I don't.
Well, then one week.
There to be, unless council plans to do more cuts later or plans to do, but getting the information on the projects and that sort of thing, that's what takes time, and we've already done that, so.
Okay. Is 2 weeks reasonable to come back and take another look? Tyler?
Just a thought that if we're closing the tender April 3rd, we should probably look for a meeting shortly after that when we have that solid number, right? The biggest project is gonna have the biggest impact, so.
So the first part of April, we'll work it out. We'll leave that in the clerk's hands. Yeah? Yes?
Do we want to call another special meeting, or do we want to do this during the committee of the whole on April 8th?
I think it's long now with back-to-back, so. Separate meeting to concentrate on this, so we're not getting tired and not have our full attention to it. Okay. Okay? Are we good, everybody, to go moved by Councilor Knowles, seconded by Councilor McQuay, resolved that this meeting do now adjourn. In favor? Carried. Thanks, everybody.